Hey everybody, welcome back to Terminus, the Fallout New Vegas of extreme metal podcasts. I am, as always, the death metal guy, aka Tree Cutter 666.
And I'm the black metal guy, a.k.a. Frost Embattled Blightstorm. Say that 10 times fast.
Opposite directions there. Of course, I am, for those who haven't heard, I am referencing the interview we just uploaded a couple days ago between the black metal guy and both Molder Yawn and Robes of Snow getting proverbially spit roasted by trees. It was a little bit off of our usual upload schedule, so I figured I'd just, plug it in case anyone had missed it.
It's a really good one. It was really fun talking to those guys. And we just chilled on a Friday night and, had a free-ranging conversation about the new EP and then a bunch of stuff relating to it from, I think, he's sort of... Charlie, so the guy from Molderon's influenced by video game soundtracks and video game environments, which was really interesting and maybe the most unexpected thing. Talking about different ideas of paganism and relating to nature and how do you do that when you live in a city or whatever, right? So it was fun.
Yeah, any of you deep cut, picture of tree Instagram black metal weirdos will really enjoy it. There's lots of actually pretty stimulating talk about paganism that I found pretty interesting. I edit the episodes, so I was listening to it in full, and actually I didn't even get bored when you guys talked about, is Thor really a dude, for like half an hour? It was pretty good, yeah.
Yeah, excellent. All right. Well, is the Trinity all one guy?
Technically, yes and no, but anyway.
All right. Well, we'll come back to that one in the next. We'll come back to that one 1,000 years from now.
And so will he.
Yeah.
All right. So I don't think we've got too much going on in the co-prosperity.
I just got that one. Okay, fair enough. Keep going.
Catholic puns. All right. So. But yeah, we don't have too much news going on or anything. We're just, honestly, Jesus Christ, the back third of this year is going to be just nothing but huge releases, it feels like. So, and us trying to find space for everything we want to talk
Terminus
about.
Extreme Metal Podcast, nothing but huge releases. Non-stop release.
Well, it's well, I mean, we did cover, on a bonus episode, we did cover Carpathian Forest, the ultimate Coomer of black metal, so.
Yeah, we are the male pig of extreme metal podcasts. 30 minutes or something.
Oh, speaking of pigs, pay pigs, if you want to become one. You can do that by supporting us in our cooming efforts on Patreon or Subscribestar. $3 and up gets you access to the Terminus Prime bonus episodes. Newest one of those is still pretty fresh. That was just like a week and a half ago. Real interesting one there. And $5 and up gets you access to the Terminus Black Circle. Where we, I don't know, we've got a guy compiling a sort of like 4chan style grid of essential Terminus underground classics just based off us spurging about them in reviews all the time, so that'll be a fun project when it's completed. And, the usual memery and shit posting, and occasionally some actual musical discussion sneaks in. And, beyond it, I flip-flopped him this time. Also, social media, follow us, Terminus on Facebook, at Terminus Podcast, Terminus on Instagram, at Terminus Extreme Metal. Whatever, let's talk about albums. You're up first. What have you got?
Well, although I suppose technically you're the one who remembered to bring this on the show, but certainly a band...
I'm just going with the stuff that we have the most experience with.
Yeah. Today's lineup is really... Yeah, I mean, I guess also our fans reminded us of this, but this is a band I've been... had eagerly wanted to hear from again, so I am glad this was brought to our attention. This is Rübezahl. I don't know how you do an umlaut over a U in German. Do you? Rübezahl. Rübezahl.
Yeah, it's just like it's like a guttural U.
Which is, I think Rübezahl, which is the name of like a German wild man or forest spirit or something. And this is Remnants of Grief and Glory, their debut full length. Rübezahl is from Alaska. and they like Hate Forest.
So there you go. What else do you need to know? Just buy it now.
Yeah, buy it now.
Okay, so after that is going to be a band returning to the show, a smaller band we discovered last year and we actually made pretty fast friends with. That is the return of Elcrost from Vietnam, this time with an untitled split with Vixenta from Australia. For those who might not have been listening when we covered Elcrost, they are a sort of progressive, melodic Black Death band. Think about maybe a more gothic play and a more black metal play on the early work by Opeth, but as we'll hear, they've definitely expanded their sonic palette. And Vixenta is a sort of eccentric post-black band that actually has a fairly long discography behind them, but this is our first experience with it. And, spoilers, we like both sides.
Yeah. All right, and then we will be doing a rapid change of tone, although actually not as much as one might think, to Serpent Column's latest EP, Katartisis, which is out on Mystikaos, although in the endless sea of confusing shit from this label and institution, it has now changed to I think Mystikaos is still a label or circle or whatever, but it's now all being distributed under the label Dissociative Visions, which was the name of a festival that they put on years ago. It's I don't fucking know. It's just all Fallen Empire to me, man. Serpent Column is Serpent Column. This is the third in a cycle of EPs, each following on a full length. This closes out the cycle, so we're excited to see what happens.
And then closing out our cycle is going to be the latest album by the legendary Nunslaughter, titled Red is the Color of Ripping Death, out predictably on Hell's Headbangers. Nunslaughter is not a band we talk about on the show a lot, but I've been a pretty big fan for a long time, and I think they're really unique and worthy of discussion, because I think it's one of those bands that everybody knows, but very few people have actually sat down and listened to a full album from.
And so, we did.
And we did it, not so that you don't have to, but to encourage you to finally do it.
True. All right, and we are back with Rübezaal's Remnants of Grief and Glory. This is the debut album of a pagan black metal band from Alaska. Two dudes in Alaska, one dude on bass, who I believe is based in Chicago, and collaborating with them. They came to my attention in 20...
Looks like it's 3-piece now. Looks like
that's what I'm saying. They had two dudes from Alaska, one dude from Chicago.
Oh, I get it. Okay.
Yeah, no, the 3-piece formed, I think, before they recorded the first. They had written some of the songs, but I think the 3-piece was played on the first EP, too. Which is how they came to my attention, with Tempering of Northern Iron. This actually came out on the label, got a tape release on the label of the dude from Elegiac.
Sacrificial Sounds, yeah.
Yes, and spiritually, it's somewhat similar in that it is ruggedly American angry mountain man music that is nevertheless rooted in a deep sense of European paganism. Sort of this maneuver of... I talked a bit about that idea when we reviewed Mortem back in the day. Mm-hmm. The idea of, how do you reimagine the Americas as, like, in the way that the Vikings saw it as Vinland or something? Or how do you transpose old gods to new soil in a way that's sensitive to the fact that it's a different place, and maybe that you're also dealing with lingering gods from before in America, right? And sort of how do you relate to this new landscape? And Rübezahl do it very, very convincingly, maybe they're sort of my paradigm for that. They fall well outside the kind of American outlaw rock paradigm we've talked about, but there are but it's very much a metal band, black metal band, but some convergences in terms of those themes, right? And it's some similar concerns. And in 2019, that EP, Tempering of Northern Iron, was doubtless my most played thing that year. I could just listen to it on loop. It was fantastic. And we'll get into their sound on that record first. But yeah, what did you you have a funny story about our covering this?
Well, yeah. So so apparently over the past like month or something, or last couple weeks at least. So not only did the black metal guy know about Rübezahl and had been a big fan for years, multiple followers and patrons of ours had apparently been bombarding him with requests to cover this and suggestions that it's right up his alley. And then, not being privy to any of that discussion on Instagram or anything, I just trotted out into the wild like a toddler, found this, and brought it back to you like, is this the kind of pagan stuff you like, Dad?
Yeah, so clearly Thor is pointing squarely at us with his hammer, yelling, "Cover this record!" Yeah, I'd sort of seen it. I'd seen that it was coming. I'd seen the cover, but I've been so busy and spaced out that I missed the release date. So thanks, fans, and thanks, Death Metal Guy. And thanks, Thor.
Yeah, I like it. Well, no, I think there's like a couple things that you've like picked up that I should have obviously seen myself over the next few weeks. So we're shoring up each other's lack of attention right now.
All right.
Well, you wanted to play something off the first one, just as like a little primer, right?
Yeah, I think we could sort of dive in here. So, and it was remarkable because they're in the like very short list of bands, like 3 of people who've really internalized seriously things about Sanko's guitar style. I would say that Death Fortress sort of flattens it out, takes away the folky and pagan stuff, sort of makes in some ways, or a little more like a little less, less earthy and more just sort of abstract angry man metal. And it becomes, but it's still really good. Death Fortress is quite good. Glush makes it very earthy and very sort of folky and romantic and lush, right? But also emphasizes the nicer Drudker side of it. Rübezahl gets the core of it, which is the basis of the melodic color that's in even the grimmest Hate Forest stuff, and the spine, and the the grimness that's built into a lot of Druid griffs, too.
And the sort of subdued but ever-present death metal quality of it.
Absolutely, yeah. So that becomes that, and that's clear on this record. It was even clearer on Tempering of Northern Iron. Just think of like the slow-moving, swirling storm clouds as you hear this. This is Alpha Apex Lupine. what really sets that apart is the rhythmic underpinning there.
Mm-hmm.
So they've got something like the jangling triplets thing you get in Graveland, occasionally in Drug, and now in the later Hate Forest, right? You know, the dang 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 dang. But it's
they got those like choppy upstroke things on the higher strings of the guitar.
And that too, yeah. Well, for sure, yes. You've got the ringing, and you've got the sort of the ringing open strings on the upper part of the guitar. But just the insistent rhythm underneath, dum da da dum da 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 dum da 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 dum da da da. That is rhythmically sets it all the Slavic stuff it's referencing. It basically half times one of the basic rhythmic gestures, and hits it. And of course, sort of there's fewer. It's a little more sparse. It makes it hit a little more like the Children of the Grave riff from Sabbath. A little more like a classic, or the Enslaved whap dum da 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 dum da 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 dum, right? Something like that. It really there's really cool expansion contraction stuff happening there, where the bass is just loping, spacing it out, and the guitar riffs are written to that time. And he's just writing these much longer melodies than you would think. You know, that sort of snaking da 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 da. You know, this is a good example of those kinds of melodies that turn around at maybe an odd, I don't know if it's odd numbers of measures, but the phrases extend far beyond their conventional length and far beyond the kind of cellular writing that was common even in Hate Forest.
Yeah, you know, I had a similar experience, like when I was reading your side of the notes, where you were describing, you know, one of the primary influences here is Hate Forest, and I didn't really know what to make of that, because that's not something I detected a lot, although, you know, obviously I'm not the big Hate Forest guy here. But then, after you played that bit off the EP, I can start to kind of stitch those ideas together and see how they still make sense. I think that part of it just comes through these guys doing a style of pagan metal, or actually the term we're avoiding, the dreaded term of Viking metal, which you can kind of associate with this in a sense.
Yeah, we'll get there.
But they're doing it in a much more rough-hewn style. Like, I would compare it to, obviously musically very different, but something like, I talk about them a lot, Blood Axe from Canada, doing like really raw, sort of like pagan Viking black metal. Great band. Everyone should listen to them. But on this record, so the salient newer elements I picked up on was, well, one, this is a lot more accessible in certain ways. Because one thing we both detected was a big influence from like really early Amon Amarth, like the first couple records. Specifically in the way that they're using these sort of blackened Norse-sounding, but still sort of death metal-shaped tremolo riffs. And that's a really big part of this record. And I was also hearing a lot of, like, Immortal and Take, but you know more about the more pagan side, background of this stuff. That's a good Freudian slip. I like that one.
Yeah.
So what did you make of the transition on this record?
I'm sure they like Immortal and Took It, and I'm sure that those are influences on this, and they'd probably say just always, right? And, you know, like, even just, you could hear it on in terms of the sort of lumbering monolithic gate in that riff I just played, right, from Alpha Apex Lupine, right? You can hear an Immortal vibe there too, right? Just in terms of the mood, right? You're standing on top of the mountain yelling. But like, so those make sense as reference points for sure. Amon Amarth also. Like, in terms of maybe we should. Yeah, more than... I never understood Amon Amarth as an influence on them until I heard this record. Now, going back, I can kind of hear it in the first one, too.
I see.
And, these guys, I think, are a little older than us. They would be exactly the right age to have grown up listening to Amon Amarth seriously.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
before Amon Amarth became kind of turned themselves into a fun pop band.
Yeah. I think that's something that we're both going to touch on to some degree, the idea of different kinds of listening to some of these classic bands.
Yeah, so, but I also associate those kinds of leads with just the arrogant war metal tradition, right? And, when I remember when I heard their first record, I associated it a lot with Axis of Advance and the more death metal leads. So there was one song in particular on that called Through Heart and Lung that was kind of the banger, and that focused on this big sort of, sort of majestically obvious trem riff, death metal trem riff, like in the kind of like Axis of Advance way. And they come off, there are a lot more riffs like that on this record. So you were pointing to that too. And yeah, Amon Amarth, I'm sure, is a reference. And so on the beginning of Thunder and Oak, they begin the record with a song called Thunder and Oak, which is sick. And you'll hear one of these big leads. So we end with the one of the sort of a riff on the Graveland motif.
Yeah, well, they like using that particular technique a lot, just that rapid, like, half-step alternation. Kind of like almost in like a thrash way, of that being a sort of center point for a riff that develops around it.
I like that. Yeah, that's true. They do make it a lot more thrashing. And you get melodies like that in Hate Forest and in the Blazebirth bands too, right? It's just sort of like a classic Slav black melody there. But it's cool that they just busted out very, like, here it's just, that last phrase was just very explicit. It just focused on that without any of the texturing that usually comes in from the higher strings, right?
Yeah, and that's one of the things I like, is when they just commit to those more stripped-down, simple riffs.
Yeah, and hearing that with, like, this thrashing downbeat drumming is pretty cool. Yeah, that sort of thrashy feeling underpins the whole thing, right? And there's so much detail here. Someone on the Bandcamp, one of the first people, noted that this record really gives more and more on each listen.
There's a ton of guitar layers going on.
Yes. And so one thing cool that I noticed there is, they're doing that dun 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 dun. And there's like a stagger. If you just listen to it quickly, it all blurs together and you hear it in the normal way you'd expect the melody to go. But there's actually a stagger where a lead leaps up. There's like there's this lead that hits just a bit later than you would think, and that like instead of finishing the riff, echoes the basic pattern of it. It's hard to describe, but people I think will hear what I mean. That sort of that bright lead that pops out at the end of the main riff in a couple versions of it. It's so cool.
I think that's part of what makes this record very good, is that, I mean, a lot of this record is based off of, like, relatively simple or relatively traditional sort of interval choices, just executed really smartly, and with the depth of guys who are just super experienced musicians.
Yeah, I would say that this track has more of the sort of meshing harmonies and clanging chord. This track has more of the difficult harmony than... So, like, yeah, the last record had more of the kind of, in those sort of, like, scowling cloud mass layers of chord. They had very dense, complex versions of that sort of Slavic harmony. And really their own take on it. And this is one of the tracks where there's still a lot of that here in the chords, but it is more direct, or direct might not be the right word, stripped down but not in a bad way than it was on the previous one. It's less, it's more accessible, and it is interacting with all these much more clearly, less sort of textural, much more lead-oriented ideas.
And speaking of that,
yes,
going for the big moments, this is a cool record. So one of the things that I, in a more meta sense, that I want to say is something that I appreciate a lot since we started doing this show is, I don't know if it's a recent trend or if it's something that was always there and I was just kind of out of the loop, but it feels like there's a lot more underground bands nowadays who are listening to some of the bigger classic bands and not really taking them for granted. Not seeing it as just kind of background radiation that's done already. Yeah. So some of my favorite parts of this record are where they're going to big, obvious stuff. They're going to a Monomarth, they're going to Immortal, but then they're taking those basic frameworks and ideas and executing them in a deeper, perhaps more difficult way that will still appeal to people who have just been listening to black metal for a shit ton of years like we have. So we're going to go over to the third track called Ether and Steel. And this is, I think this is an obvious, like, just big banger of a track.
Yeah,
like, this would be the single if there was one. So let's listen to this and let's talk about how they're taking some of these standard riff forms that we've heard before and playing with them in ways that are still exciting for people so many years into this style.
Mm-hmm.
A quick note before we get into the riffing there. I love the vocal performance on this record. It's so good. It's so powerful. And it's great when a black metal band does this and just asks the very simple question of, like, so why do black metal vocals have to be high? Why can't I just grunt like a berserker the whole time? Yeah, no, please do that. That's fucking awesome. Like,
very much agreed. The vocals are central to the personality of this, and they're more resonant than the Senko growl. They've got their own personality. They're clearly inspired by that move of the Hate Force move, but they've got their own personality. And part of the mood of this, part of the broader mood of American black metal right now, the serious stuff, is kind of virility, right? Virility and solidity. And this band doesn't maybe have the more bright solar vibe that some of those bands do. This is very, very grim and storming stuff, but like, even on tracks like this is a more sort of melancholy melodic song. But they, the vocals anchor, the vocals and the sort of rooted, like unflashy but powerful bass performance really help anchor this, even when it gets this melodic and flowery, really help anchor it in a sense of just like manly presence.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that reminds me, it's like we always talk about you going to black metal for like heaviness and aggression, and it's like, this reminds me, I do like that too. Like, black metal can be heavy, and it's still awesome. It doesn't all have to be twinkly shit for me.
It's heavy in a way that's convincing to you as a death metal guy.
Oh yeah. This matches up. I would play with one of my death metal bands a show with these guys, and it would make sense.
Yeah.
But obviously, we got to talk about the riffs, because these are, this is, even for the record, as kind of accessible as it is, and always, I shouldn't need to clarify, but just for the sake of it, that's not a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with being accessible and having music that's approachable, even in this style. But obviously, this track stands out in terms of, this is the lead single, this is the banger, this is third day at Wacken, warm beer, crushing it in the pit, drunk by 11 a.m. type shit. And a lot of these riffing ideas are very inspired by, like, One Sent from the Golden Hall and, like, At the Heart of Winter or later Immortal. But what I think they're doing, the way that they're keeping that fresh is, well, part of it is just because it's a raw performance, it's a raw production. But additionally, because they're using these basic forms of these kinds of riffs we've heard before, but then they're touching them up around the edges. And part of that is going to be from the Slavic influence, the kind of Senko-style textures. On this track, they're just kind of popping up at fills towards the ends of phrases, but they're still definitely there. And then some of it is coming, I think, from a little bit of, like, bright modern French stuff. Like I said, just around the edges, not the core of the riffs, but I think that's an influence here.
Well, I think it's a big influence on this track. Like, in some of those it's those chords. It's
it's
a lot of the core riffs are with the Franco-Finnish style. The ones that aren't Amon Amarthi, right? The leads sort of stand out in this Amon Amarthi way. You could, like, they have that sort of, like, sophisticated, bright vibe you get in Friends of the Sun Cross or whatever, but you also get that sort of, there's that gorgeous the sort of dyadic arpeggiated thing. You're saying that sounds pretty Amon Amarth, right?
That's pretty Amon Amarth, but I was also pointing it out while I was playing because there's a similar dyadic phrase that they're using in the previous track that we sampled. They keep coming back to those, like, dyad runs as a sort of, like, like in the place of where a thrash chug would be, like a little thrash triplet. They use that as a sort of base point to expand up or down from, and they're doing that there.
Dude, and that part is just glorious. That has a nice architectural feel, vertical feel, and it just lifts up out of the music in a very unexpected way. And they don't really go back to it in that sequence, right? It's not a long rep riff, but it's kind of like it's kind of a highlight there. And there's some real neoclassical nuance in how they form the arpeggios. The other thing it reminds me of is Philip Glass. Obviously, like a lot more
weird way, yeah.
a lot more robust. I'd rather listen to this. But, imagine just, like Koyaanisqatsi or any of the Glassworks or whatever, the that's like a very Philip Glassy kind of thing to do. I think a lot of those things are much better done by metal bands than, dudes with orchestras. But
yeah, you got to be in the mood for Glass,
Yeah, no, there's a certain mood, sipping your coffee, looking at the rain out the window. And did you know Philip Glass, actually, his day job was a taxi driver?
Really?
That's one of those things that makes this like, oh, that's pretty... Some of those New York guys are pretty fucking cool.
Some of those guys are all right.
Yeah, they're all right. Anyway, I got sidetracked because we were talking about the leads. But yes, there are those riffs. And this track is the one that has the most of them and used the most in the way they are now.
So, of course, I'm going to select that track.
Of course, you're going to select it. And, of course, I'm going to say, to me, in some ways, the emphasis on that side of things is a step away from the things that most captivated me about this band. And there is more of that on this record. But when the riffs are that good... am I going to listen to this and love this song? Fuck yeah. And the way those all just flow, riff on riff, and the way they're elegantly shaped, and the way that each version, there's not, unlike a lot of the bands using the Franco-Finnish style, right? There's not that just homogeneous guitar tone and chord shape being bent in different kind of arbitrary note arrangements, right? There's
no grid riffs here.
Absolutely nothing even resembling a grid riff. These all have very clearly defined shapes. And each riff is harmonized somewhat differently. Even the ones that are all written in that same Franco-Finnish style. Right? There's not
there's real harmonic depth. There's a unique harmonic language.
Yeah, I almost wonder, this is very self-consciously written to be the banger. Again, self-conscious not in a bad way. I can almost picture him laughing as he knocks these riffs out. Not in a sense of, we're doing this as a joke, but in a sense of, I hear all these other young whippersnappers playing these triumphant riffs. Let me whip these out. Ha ha, ha ha ha, ha ha, look how many of these I can play. Sort of like those moments where you're on the battlements with the battle axe and the dudes are coming up one side and you're just laughing at them, smacking them with the battle axe. It's kind of like that. As one does.
Always, every weekend.
But speaking of things that make really good use of, that is tracks that prominently features those riffs, but integrates them with the old Rübezahl, the more sort of clanging, ringing, densely harmonized Slavic style, and the hate forest type dark minor scales, and the scowling inhuman mood. We've got my favorite track, Meditations of a Tyrant. On lone winter nights, when the wind is unsparing, I can still hear the screams of the wounded and dying. I recklessly spent the lives of good men. I have been cruel, sometimes unjustly, and avenged myself beyond the limit of the gods. I never won the love of my people. I never turned the hearts of the peoples whose lands I crushed. No. But they honor me, and the horns of my fathers beckon me to the High Council. Would I do it all again? I would, and in due time I shall.
Is that a creative writing exercise, or is that from something?
That's Meditations of a Tyrant. I just wrote. I just wrote it. Yeah.
Okay, nice.
Yeah. That's the song. Just immediately suggests all that.
Guest performance by Robert Baratheon over here. So yeah, obviously that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fucking awesome. I mean, do we even need to comment? Almost like it's just.
No, I think. I mean, it kind of speaks for itself. I guess I would point out there's definitely got the vibe of some of those slower songs on later Immortal records there, especially that huge riff towards the end. That dun 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 dun.
Well, that got me thinking of another thing. The main riff to this song, which is voiced much more like a Hate Forest riff, also has this, which is kind of Celtic pentatonic thing in it.
Yeah.
I am sure the other thing that I would say this is a hypothesis normally, but I'm sure the other thing that's bleeding through into the more sort of glorious lead work and even the big chug parts is Solstice UK.
Okay.
Known to all men of culture and occupying a somewhat similar territory to this record in particular. In that it is florid and melodic, that more so than this, right? Florid and melodic, and but anchored in a very grim sense of like medieval darkness, and with a lot of that sort of flourishing lead work that doesn't lack a kind of attack to it.
Yeah,
so
it's it. Well, I think that goes back to the things I was saying. This wonderful fusion of bigger metal ideas, but played in the manner that we really respect as, like, dedicated underground metal guys.
Oh, you know what? And the other thing I'm surprised you didn't mention here is Winterfilleth.
To a degree, but I think these guys are coming at
big lead. Think about that, like, sort of the really one where I was just laughing, like, they earned this, the
yeah, right? I think the way they implement these things is just so different from Winterfilleth. I didn't really draw that connection.
Just the mode of sentimentality they hit at times, like with that riff. Like, that riff is very close to kinds of riffs other bands have written. Amon Amarth too, right? And it moves through exactly the intervals you would expect in that way, but I've never heard it done so well. Just total necessity. And set up by the song. But, like, it's a bit Winterfilleth, and I feel like a lot of the sweeter parts on this record are. And I have to say, Bud, while we're on the subject, it's taken a lot for me to say this, but I went back and listened to Threnody of Triumph, and I like it a lot better than I did back in the day.
Yeah, it's the world's best metalcore album.
I'm more able to just get down with the more sort of blissed out or flowery aspects of it, and
you can't listen to the Swart Raven and not be like, okay.
No, well, I always liked that one, but yeah, no, and also just I hear shading in the guitar, like it is still a relatively monochrome kind of nice sounding guitar style, but like I hear a lot more internal variation in it than I used to be able to it, just because I've been listening to shit longer.
Yeah, I'm no
longer angry at them for not being Hate Forest.
I was actually trying to just play around with some Winterfilleth stuff on guitar the other day. It's actually a lot more complex than you would think at first blush. There's a lot of very big, broad chords hiding in those tremolo riffs, like 5-string chords that they're strumming all the way through. It's interesting.
Yeah, and Senko takes them seriously enough to, like, I don't know, I think he did a split with them and shit. So, that says something. But although he also hung out with Neige, so,
All right, well, to wrap this up for the sake of time, all right, so Voyage, towards the end of the record. This is going to be kind of a deep-cut structural thing. So what we're going to listen to is a lot of the same kind of stuff we've heard before. But I want to talk about specifically the idea of let's do what we call affectionately on the show stadium black metal in a way that makes sense for guys like us, or guys that are really into underground music.
Okay.
Well, and maybe it's just a matter of, like in a case like this, what if we put, instead of a riff or two between the choruses, what if we put like 4 in there and created a really narrative thing, really earn that big resolution at the end. And so let's check this sample out, and that's what you're going to hear. So yeah, lots of great riffs, lots of things that could be big moments on their own if given the import, but in this context, they're just treated as a string of riffs building upon each other. So even though these are melodies you may have heard something like before, they've never been treated like this. They've never been used purely in the sense that they're part of a progressive structure, slowly building on itself like the best black metal does.
It's interesting you chose this as in relation to the stadium black metal thing, because I hear that from the last riff for sure. That's just a huge, that's like the climax of the record. That's just like, yeah, right? And it's an organic evolution on some phrases that are already in the riffola preceding it, right? But but a lot of that strikes me. This track, in fact, I think maybe not quite as much in terms of mood as Meditations of a Tyrant, but in terms of like riffing style, this is maybe the most Hate Foresty on there. In terms of just a lot of those rolling riffs you just heard there, the wom dum da dum da 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 dum, the more darker versions of it that come before the really catchy version at the end. Those are have maybe a few more notes in them, but that's exactly how some of the more riffy moments in Old Hate Forest are written, and especially on the new record, you get a lot like that. But what he's doing, as you say, you're right, this is way more riffy. Like, in terms of number of riffs and the way they're transitioning fluidly, and just, like, the idea, like, okay, we could do, like, instead of doing one sort of cascading, big, lead-centered drone riff for, like, 4 minutes, we could do, like, 2 back-to-back like that, and then throw into another cool section.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of elaborate variation. There's a lot of cool stuff. I mean, it's a really good album. I probably should have mentioned Runefire Records at one point, shouldn't I?
Hail! This is Brandon from Cromlech, and you're listening to Terminus.
All right, we are back, and I'm very glad to have these guys back on the show. Like I mentioned up front, this is a split between Elcrost, who we featured last year with their EP Foregone Fables, and now they are back with a split with Vixenta from Australia. This is our first exposure to them. Although, interesting, weird little note, apparently Vixenta at one point, Jared Moran was playing drums for them from Evaporated Sores and...
oh, weird.
Yeah, and damn, what was that other band we covered with Nick from Hessian Firm?
Yeah, the very good sort of death grinding cryptopsy thing.
Yeah. Just reference it in the note. Well, actually, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to pull it up. That's not fair of me. Maggot Crown. Yeah, Cryptic and World Secure. Very cool. So yeah, apparently he was, I guess, doing session drums for them for a couple years remotely. So Elcrost, the last time we had them on the show, like I said, we covered them fairly early when we started the podcast, and we became pretty good friends with one of the members, and we liked that EP a lot. Obviously, it was kind of like a young band with room for improvement, but there was a core of something really cool there. So for those who haven't heard that, sort of progressive-tinged, melodic Black Death stuff, Opeth is a big influence. There's a gothic atmosphere that pervades the whole thing. Very, sort of, what would you call it, like romantic Victorian era Europe? Or...
no, he's really influenced by they're really influenced by the decadent phase, so late 19th century art, and yeah, it would roughly correspond maybe to some of the late Victorian period in England, but especially by the decadent you would use especially for the French, especially stuff after Baudelaire. I think I think Huang Dao wrote that Rimbaud is a big, that's Rimbaud, is a big influence on the new one. So he's seriously interested in, I think, these guys are all sort of seriously interested in just the history of culture and art in general. And
I didn't realize until I looked it up that Huang Dao actually does all the art for Elcrost as well.
Oh yeah, dude, his art page. Yeah, honestly, yeah, this is all public. People should follow him. His art page, long name is so pretentious with underscores in between them, is really cool stuff. That's often in this sort of maybe if it's British kind of Edwardian kind of art, maybe Art Deco. I don't know, kind of Edwardian decadent goth kind of art.
And it also has this flair of sort of Asian woodcut printing and like flat colors and stuff. It's a super cool merge of Eastern and Western art, which I think is sort of becoming Elcrost's thing, or it just is, Yeah. So,
I should say also, full disclosure. He was okay with us saying this. Full disclosure: Huang Dao is a patron of the show.
Yeah, he signed up with us, and that's fucking awesome. He's a really cool dude, and he's doing really awesome music. And now, I think, to get to this split, okay, Elcrost has really arrived now. Like, this is, like, really enjoyed the last EP, but this is just categorically a step up in every pertinent dimension, I think.
What's the cliche? Quantum leap? It's just evident from the first note. It just sounds so much better. It fills the room on big speakers. And you know I don't care very much about production, but, like, if you're doing digital produced stuff, right, it can't sound thin and sterile. It has to sound big, and this sounds really big.
Yeah, that was one of our big criticisms of the last one, was that the production was just kind of flat and kind of sterile. Not a problem here now. It's still clearly a home job, but there's just, in the past year since the last record, the production abilities of, I believe it is their bassist, who I believe is also the guy from Vong, if I'm remembering that correctly.
That might be a little closer. That might be... God, we should have looked this up.
It was a while back.
Vong is a friend of theirs. He may have played live with them, or they may have played live with him to play his stuff live.
Oh
Elcrost is a separate deal. So our the bassist and sound guy is credited as Lunar Haze, and then there's Lunar Haze.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, so excellent production this time around. And the songwriting has just taken a big jump up. So we've got two sides to cover. So I'm going to get to the samples relatively quickly. So each band has contributed 2 tracks, sort of a short track and a long track. So I'm just going to dive in with Hunters of Dawn and Eventide by Elcrost. This is going to be, there's a kind of an extended intro that's a few minutes long on the song. We're going to come in right at the end of that, right when the sort of ripper riffs start. And let's see what they've been doing for the past year. So yeah, it just immediately huge riffs right from the beginning. Reminds me of the stuff that we heard off the tracks that we liked the most off the release last year, like Rape of a Nymph, that sort of thing.
There was a really one or two just incredible riffs on that had this kind of arch gothic feel.
Yeah, and I think that's something that these guys have really leaned into to the point where I think, like, sort of initially we described them as kind of proggy. I think the real accurate description now is they're kind of like a gothic black metal band.
Yeah, I think that's for sure.
You know, especially if you go into the lyrics for their side of the split, which are fucking phenomenal. Oh my god! And
I haven't even had a chance to take a look yet, but I bet I'm not surprised.
I'll do a couple quick stanzas that are just outstanding. Striding a blaze on golden wagon, the eight-legged horse pushed forth, pacing like lightning and thunder. Ulf's piercing howls lacerated the sky. Drip, drip, alveolus. Trampled to death for 1,000-fold, the talon speared forth through plains of gold. Vagrants, surrenders, deceivers, and prey, heed the choirs of Bane, a hymn of dismay. It's fucking awesome.
Heed
that.
the sound of silence. Heed the call of Woden, freely roamed in the hunt. Damn.
Oh, it's so good, you know? And yet it's also, you know, because obviously they're drawing from the well of Norse mythology there, but it still has this distinct, it really is like Roman mythology from like a decadent British poet. You know, it's an amazingly realized aesthetic in this music.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting to use Norse stuff in this aesthetic context is interesting because these reference points so often just get patched on to Satanism and blah blah blah. The next one is I think supposed to be written from the perspective of the goat god Pan, the forest god, seeing a sleeping nymph. So again, in Elcrost world, nymphs are in trouble. It's
lots of problems for nymphs.
It's although so it is in the mythology too, right?
That's true.
It's a hard day's work being a nymph. So yeah, you were pointing out also that sort of cascading lead over the first big riff. The first big riff comes in and it's a little like chord progression-y, but it's just so good, right? That the power chord one, it's just very the progression moves in a somewhat unexpected way, and it's just very well done. And then you're like, oh wait, this is the rhythm part for that huge lead, right? The da 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 da.
Yeah. You know, it's got that like that very simple kind of Beethoven quality to it. And that I had compared these guys to,
sliding narrow half steps that make it seem more late 19th century, that make it seem more sinister, more decadent, more like a French melody. A kind of melody that's vaguely gestured at in a lot of the vampiric BM.
But never really committed to in the way that this is.
Yeah, here these guys are, I think, more in touch with the root source, even more probably than Willie was.
Oh yeah,
in some ways.
And and it's also the predominant influence just to a lot of those riffs is I'd compared it on the previous EP that a lot of this stuff sounded like some of the best moments of early Cradle of Filth. And then, I think it was Huang Dao said we never actually listened to Cradle of Filth. It sounds like they went back to that well and explored that a little bit more and incorporated those ideas more fully, and they've just become even better for it.
Yeah, so also I want to point out there's some later in the song, because this is a long song that's very well pulled off. There's a very good moment of like real goth rock type stuff where a lot of freedom is given to the... It's really good. If we could sample more, we would. But a lot of freedom is given to the bassist. And the
bass work is awesome.
Yes. And there's a big sort of... And it's not even neatly imitating any one gothy. It's not Joy Division bass. It's not like Killing Joke bass. But you can hear him absorbing all of that, right? Absorbing like Bauhaus and the sort of... Nephilim, all that, and the bass just like swooping up in these big arcs, doing a lot more rapid motion than you usually get in gothy stuff, but it fits perfectly with that vibe, and really like cool cascading arpeggio guitar stuff. I said cascading for the second time in this review. Shout out to Cascada. But it's very cool big goth moment that doesn't sound like now we're doing a goth rock part. It fits organically into the black metal song. Sorry. Also, I keep snorting. I'm congested. Sorry, guys. So in terms of influences that things we mentioned on the last review that actually seem to be showing up here somewhat. Dawn, right? There, I mentioned that one of those big riffs on Rape of a Nymph sounded like a Dawn riff. There is much more of a... So this band has always been into Opeth, but this other more sort of severe melodic Black Death side, of the Swedish sound is more prominent here. Song comes in, Calendula comes in on a riff that's very much in the Dawn vein. The rest of the track doesn't have that kind of influence so directly, but it permeates the most sort of the big, flashy Swedish riffs. This is a sequence of things in that vein, and let's listen to that.
To hear the woman's song, radiating through the air.
You know, it's a really metal lyric. One by one.
Always.
Yeah,
Always.
yeah, always.
Dude, that fucking choral part, though.
That surprised. I'm sure our listeners were not expecting that. Just. Yeah, your jaw was on the floor when you heard that, right?
Dude, yeah, it was surprising.
When I first heard that,
it was
like,
surprising me hearing it again.
You know the meme with the guy where he's bending backwards further and further? It's like, oh, It's,
Vince McMahon, yeah.
Yeah, the Vince McMahon thing. Yeah, that was definitely the moment, because it's like, what the fuck? Are they doing that? And then it was like, he's singing he's doing this sort of like high, this wailing, distended wailing, and he's hitting all the notes, and the voice is clear and not forced, and it sounds good.
It's
and that initial choral effect, like the production on this is like, this is another good example of like modern underground bands engaging with like big stadium size 90s metal and taking it seriously, and just like taking full advantage of digital production to just go do it themselves.
Oh yeah, no, it's such a so obviously all the riffs that surround that are great, but that's the climax of their side of the split, clearly, and it's kind of cool that it occurs on the shorter song rather than the longer one. This is like the more compressed banger song, and just the fact that they stick the landing so well on that it's just super impressive, and I can't wait for them to elaborate on ideas like that more on another full length or something.
I mean, the whole point is that the big bands, everyone learned to hate them because they kept doing shit like that and it sucked.
Yeah, what if we just did it good for once?
Yeah. Do it good. Do it again, but good. The other thing I want to point out just is that, you've pointed out, I think correctly, right, that a lot of the Vietnamese stuff has this kind of androgyne quality to it, right? Or it's in touch with the more feminine side of the world. And we're hearing that more in modern black metal, like Narbaleth, for instance. Very attuned to the divine feminine. And I think these guys would fully just agree with that in terms of the decadent thing, both in terms of a kind of embarrassive and androgynous aesthetic, but also just sort of fascination with, right? There's a very, frankly, sexual quality to this music, too, just fascination with women, right?
Oh, dude, this is really horny music.
Yes, yeah. Though the lyrics to this song, which I haven't read yet, are apparently very horny.
They're very exceedingly.
Yes,
very horny. They're like Deftones horny.
Yeah, so goth decadent. But the cool thing is that within that, right, there's some god Pan in this song too. There's a masculinity at work as well. In terms of the mellow-death approach at the beginning, right, the Swedish stuff. That's not fruity mellow-death. That's that first riff has almost the form of an In Flames riff. But the way it's played in that sort of bouncing, thrashing way with those sort of flourishes at the end, it comes off as aggressive and driving. And the riffs that develop after that too are those are sort of fist up heavy metal riffs.
Yeah, no, it's a
those are manly melodic Swedish Black Death riffs.
Yeah, really, what we're looking at on this side of the split is Elcrost has taken all the elements that they were great at from that EP. They've cut out some of the stuff that wasn't working as well, and as a result, we have something way more organic and just way more polished sounding and just awesome. And I can't wait to hear these guys do a full length with this new established sound.
For sure.
All right.
So,
Vixenta. Australian, described as post-black band, which I guess is appropriate. Although now I'm second-guessing everything after listening to Damien from Robes of Snow talk about the post-black versus atmospheric black dilemma on our...
This is definitely post-black.
Yeah, this is definitely post-black. But I think it's post-black coming from a very different angle. So, post-black, I mean, naturally the logic of that music has always been, post-rock meets black metal. And, the whole black gaze thing has kind of fallen into that, too. So really, post-black is this aggregate term that means black metal more or less influenced by different kinds of rock music. So it's very broad. It doesn't really tell you a lot about it. But what I think is interesting about Vixenta is that I feel like the primary influences outside of black metal aren't really coming from post-rock, but more like 90s alt-rock. Which is a very strange thing to hear, but one that actually works extremely well. I don't think this really works as black metal. But I don't think that's the intent. This is not really riff-based in the way that we think of it. This is structurally much more like very ambitious alternative rock with a lot of influences outside of itself wrapped up in a sort of black metal aesthetic. And honestly, when I heard this side, I actually really enjoyed it. I anticipated you really disliking it, but it turns out you found a lot to enjoy here. So
I would say it's fine. It's I like
that's huge praise coming from you for anything post-black.
Yeah. This is and more than that, I think it's good. I think about Vixenta, the thing that is important in good post-black is that it be honest, right? So not trying to be black metal and also not trying to deliver some kind of novelty. And also probably not sounding like post-rock. This is
that helps. Yeah.
Yeah, so and yeah, you might think, okay, so then it must sound like shoegaze. And I was listening to these because they're really not. I'm sure he likes shoegaze, but these really aren't shoegaze chords. I think you're right about the alt rock thing. You're right about that. And there are certain various kinds of alt rock chording coming in this very chord based music.
Yeah, these aren't really metal riffs. They are more riffs based off chord structures like rock music.
Yeah, so why don't you play them Phantom Blood? Because I think that'll...
I'm going to play Phantom Blood, and for everybody listening, I mean, you've seen the notes, so you already predict what I'm going to say. But listen to this sample with 90s alt-rock in your mind, and see if you can predict by the end of the sample who I think one of the biggest influences on this side of the split is.
All right.
So, yeah, I think the alt-rock is pretty apparent to me there, and I think very specifically a lot of the ideas on this side are coming from Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness era Smashing Pumpkins. And actually, I stepped outside to grab a smoke real quick with my wireless headphones while I was playing, and I sung Tonight Tonight.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was just thinking that. To sum you with the smile.
Yeah, and I was like, because I suspected it was in the same key, and yes, this is the same key as Tonight Tonight.
Oh yeah, no, it's really the chords too, right? Yeah, right.
Yeah.
You could sing that melody over this.
Yeah, you can sing it across it, and it matches up perfectly, and that's awesome. I love that because I think it's safe to say that, like, in terms of '90s alt rock, Smashing Pumpkins is like one of the pinnacles, right?
Yeah, it's the best.
Yeah, as far as shit that metalheads should be going back and listening to, that and Siamese Dream and Melancholy are incredible records. Yeah, I was just listening to Siamese Dream again the other day.
And although this guy's focusing on all the parts of Pumpkins that are the most alt-rock, as far as those bands having a substantial relationship to metal, like, my God, I'll take Billy Corgan's version of it over at Soundgarden's any day.
Oh yeah, well, Billy Corgan, I think, has said in interviews that heavy metal is a major influence to him.
Oh yeah, no, I mean it has. I mean he probably. I mean he surely listened a lot to Metallica, but he probably also was aware of. What was that Chicago death metal band that everyone forgets about that was good?
Like half of them throughout.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
But yeah. So, and I think that listening to those kinds of chords played in this context is fascinating. And actually, just looking it up, as we talk, the lyrics for this side are fucking outstanding as well. And they're crazy, warlike black metal lyrics set against this. Yeah, dude. Yeah, King of the Blood, betrayed, no choice but to escape. My kin has gone insane, not who he once was. Summoned by the Lord of Darkness, commanding his night hordes across the land. What the fuck? We've got
it sounds like Dark Souls.
Yeah, it sounds like Dark Souls, where it sounds like In the Nightside Eclipse lyrics or something. Mm-hmm. And I love that juxtaposed against this very beautiful kind of wistful music. It's such a different take on post-black, and one that I think a lot of people could learn from. And like you kind of suggested earlier, it succeeds so well because it's not really trying to be black metal in a traditional way.
So what? And it's kind of like, remember that record, the Janoon record, sort of Slavic post-black thing that was really awful, except for the last song had a big, broad Smashing Pumpkins gesture that we both liked.
Yes.
So this is like true. That as the whole band, which is cool.
Yeah. Why don't we just do the cool part forever?
Yeah. What do you make of the vocals here? Because I was thinking, I understand. So at the very beginning of the sample, right, you're getting the delicate arpeggiated version. You get the screams, and the screams are pretty good. They're pretty wrenching. They got a bit of the Danny Filth quack in there at the back, but they're very plausible over the loud parts. Over the loud parts, they sound just miserable and nasty in a nice way that balances out the sweetness of the guitars, which is clearly the intent. There's screamo, classic screamo stuff, and certainly depressive black metal, where the whole point is that over the delicate parts, the harsh vocals are supposed to sound awkward.
Yeah.
But here they really do over some of the quieter parts, and it's got me wondering where, strange of me to be asking for this, but I almost wonder if he should experiment with a cleaner or somewhat different style of vocal on those softer parts.
I think I know
even
what
just
you're
for some
talking
grungy,
about.
Soft, loud effect.
Yeah, I think that could work. I think it's mostly a mixing issue, though, because something I did notice is that the vocals do seem very loud, even during the hardest parts of this music.
That's certainly true.
I think maybe just knocking them down a few decibels would solve a lot of the problems immediately. I think that if they just sat in the mix a little bit more rather than be, resting on top of it, it would all kind of put itself together. Now, I wouldn't discourage the idea of maybe incorporating some of those sort of grungy style vocals, because that's where this band seems to be at inherently. So I think that would probably be a natural win, but I think the primary issue here is they're just kind of too loud in general. Just dial them back a little bit, and then I think the problem solves itself.
All right, cool. So after that last night at Goth Prom song, or alternative prom, we have the sorrowful screams of 1,000 wicked souls. Okay, so this one's about hell, and
actually, this appears to be the one that's more about a girl. I can't tell. I like how these guys are constantly frustrating our expectations.
Dude, yeah. It's so Sorrowful Screams, right? Last song on the whole EP. It's a pretty long EP, and this is the longer of the two tracks, right? So they're basically tasked with bringing it home. here. And it's like, okay, well, you're a post-black band, but you got to do it, there's got to be a heavy part at some point. So here's the heavy part. Let's see how he pulls it off. So that was very heavy, but does that really sound like black metal?
No, although I'm interested in what you described it as, because I feel like I have a very different read on it.
Okay, well, like, to me it sounds like, when the breakdown hits, it's just big kind of root to octave, big sort of expansive whole note root octave phrases, sort of staggered over the drums, not entirely losing momentum, but sort of working as a breakdown. And that and the sort of textures, combined with the particular high screams, just remind me of Amun-Ra and kind of neurosis-y European Atmos sludge stuff.
Okay.
I hate that I used the word Atmos sludge. I don't believe in atmospheric sludge. Sorry, let me rephrase that.
It was a better term than post-metal. All right.
That's certainly true. That's certainly true. Now everyone calls... I can't believe... Neurosis gets called post-metal. Okay, I should just call Neurosis a stenchcore band.
That's fair. I mean, it's as close to that as it is anything else.
Mm-hmm.
But no, I mean, what I would say is, like, listening to that, I get where you're coming from, but what if it was just, like, modernized Peaceville? What if it was just, like, modern, like, Paradise Lost or Catatonia?
That would fit very well with... that would explain why this dude hangs with Elcrost.
Yeah. That or even, Hanging Garden. You know, we were.
Oh, it is a
discussing
little
that.
like Hanging Garden. Yeah, I hear that.
Yeah, like Hanging Garden obviously compresses everything down into these like very tight kind of pop metal songs, and this is more expansive. But a lot of the techniques seem to be kind of similar in the way the kind of heavy, sort of doomy riffs are executed.
You know, also Hanging Garden is kind of in that tradition of also Hanging Garden also fits into that sort of like heavy punk based European sad metal or sort of textured heavy slow stuff.
Yeah, so
like
we're
I
looking
think
at kind of a convergence of different ideas.
exactly like that. I guess what I mean is that convergence between the Peaceful stuff and the Amon Ra stuff and the Cult of Luna stuff is kind of in Hanging Garden as well. Yeah.
No, but it is very nice, and that's where you can hear a little bit of the post rock creep in, just with this slow unfolding elaboration of these simple ideas. But the aggregate effect is something. It's like the problem with post rock is that it's in too much of a liminal space between ideas that are cooler than it. It's like you could either be a full like epic metal band, or you could be a cool, tightly wound alt rock band, and it kind of feels like these guys said, well, why go for the space in between? Let's just combine the best parts of both.
now can't be given back. Shut my mouth and strike the demons. Cursed you and your reasons. Out of hand and out of season. Out of love and out of feeling. So bad. When I can, I will. Words define the bliss. When I can, I will. Not to almost be it. Not to not quite see it. Told enough to always feel it. Always told I always feel it. No more promise, no more sorrow. No longer will I follow anybody here. I just want to be me. When I can, I will. Try to understand the way I can. I will.
All right, and we are back from our break, whatever it was when we decide what to put in for the break, with Serpent Column's new EP, Katartisis, out now on Mystikaos, now distributed through Dissociative Visions. So, this is, so we talked about in our interview with Serpent Column last fall, this forms a definite place in a kind of cycle of records, which have moved from full length to EP to full length to EP to full length and now to EP, right? Sort of on the model that DSO did in their central period or heyday. It's clear that this is the close of this particular cycle, and I think the question remains, will there be another one? I think that's an open question. There are things about this record that give it a strong note of finality, like finality, but there are also things that suggest maybe not. Certainly this is being, the way that record's being presented at least suggests it is another run in a continuing entity. So I guess we'll see. Like a lot of the EPs, it is, or like all the EPs, it has a shoot from the hip quality, sort of impulsive, exploratory. I would say that Invicta was very exploratory. Endless Detainments, which was very popular, was more sort of go for the guttural, blasted, aggressive, lots of hardcore influence up front, and sounds that sort of bled into Katotos, the last full length, a little bit. But that record also had a kind of adventurous or experimental thing to it, because it was so the songs were so short and blistering, one or two, often like one, sometimes one riff, basically, right? Really grinding, in a way that related to things that we'd heard on Serpent Column before, but was totally on a different level of scale and structure. This EP feels more like it's meant to be it's still, the basic format of Endless Detainments has been preserved. These are very short songs for the most part, with one exception. And they're very high intensity. They also have a feeling like maybe they were some of them were maybe semi-improvised in a sort of blasted out kind of way. So it has that vibe, but it does feel more consolidating than those last two, in the same way that Katotos kind of consolidated certain kinds of things achieved over the first two full lengths and the EPs. So a quick and dirty way of describing this would be like the Endless Detainments format, but with more of the severe death, Black Death riffing, and more of the lush melodic color that you get on Katotos, and a little bit on the more melodic parts of Mirror and Darkness. So that's where it sits in the Serpent column cycle or catalog. What did you make of a death metal guy?
This was interesting. I've got some... So I think that in terms of the Serpent column discography, which I had heard pieces of, but I listened to in full front to back for the first time before we did that interview last year, I think this ranks as possibly my favorite Serpent column release, kind of in contention with the Invicta EP. There's something about Serpent column's EPs that tend to stick with me a little bit better than the full lengths, and I've got ideas for why that might be. And I guess I'll get to it now. This record, for me, really scans much more like a very advanced, very complex, very intense hardcore record than it does a heavy metal record to me. So obviously, and I feel like that's almost a juxtaposition between the EPs and the full lengths. I feel like the full lengths tend to be much more clearly on the metal side of the spectrum. Obviously, both sides are influencing each other across the entire discography. But I feel like the EPs tend to be, especially rhythmically, explorations of different dimensions that aren't necessarily always carried to the full lengths. The
very liquid sound on Invicta creeps into certain parts of certain songs, and I think increased the fluidity in his playing in general. But yeah, that general approach to really elongated, fluctuating, oceanic kind of rhythms has not really come back as a major thing.
Yeah, and Invicta is one of my favorites because it's got this very strange atmosphere of sort of like gnarly, introspective, like black metal meets very severe screamo in a lot of ways. And the screamo definitely returns on this record, like very, very possibly more distinctly than it ever has in the Serpent column discography.
No, I think that's true.
But in addition, the thing that people always say, and the thing that we complain about, and I think we touched on the interview, was the referring to Endless Detainment as blackened mathcore, which is I understand how people from outside of extreme music approach it from that perspective, but that's clearly not really the idea of what was going on. I mean, grindy, certainly, hardcore, certainly, mathcore, it doesn't have anything to do with Dillinger Escape Plan or anything like that.
Maybe loosely in the sense that it's disciplined and fiercely technical, but, the basic song formats on Endless Detainment were, like, hardcore and minimalist black metal.
Yeah, we're not talking about, like, a Siamese
thrash
record.
There was, thrash. There was, like, a Slayer riff on that.
Yeah, and I think that what will inevitably happen, unfortunately, is people will say the same thing about a lot of the stuff on this record. They'll think of it from a mathcore perspective.
Dude, while we're on that subject, we're only going to do it once, right? Because this has been a theme for us. Is Serpent Column is a band that has attracted a following that does not particularly only understands a couple dimensions of it, if that, and on the other side, it should be, because it occupies this, has interested a bunch of the sort of internet art metal crowd
has not attracted interest from the underground to the same degree, which is a shame, because this is very, very serious music. So that's the thing we harp on. The only thing I'll say to that note is just the best Bandcamp review is blistering, mathy, technical black metal. It's all of those and none of those. The sum is greater than the parts. It's definitely has similarities to Aranci Pazuzu, but way more aggressive. The guitar work juxtaposed with the blast beats also recalls Infant Island a little. I had to look up Infant Island. It's like a screamo band, but like a new one, like a black screamo band. But Aranci Pazuzu. That's Finnish weebly woobly cosmish psych thing.
Yeah. It's like, I don't know, it's like Serpent Column is a Rorschach test for your biases in music. You know, it's like
I think it sounds like Jism.
Yeah, I mean, you can say that as much as you can that it sounds like anything else. Yeah. So, since this is an EP, we've only got a sample apiece, and we sampled what I would say are two of the more distinct sides of the record, and not the ones you're expecting, listeners. So, I want to listen to the back end of a track called Cold Fire. And this is I think, a really good example of the very extreme kind of technical hardcore side that we're hearing on this EP. So let's listen to it real quick, and then I'll talk about potential influences and potential reference points for it. Okay, so potential influences here. You know, a lot of these are going to be reference points that you've showed me, actually, because you've showed me sides of what I would call technical hardcore, because I don't know the nuanced ways you kids talk about this music. But so one thing that I hear a lot is Sectioned, who you introduced me to, and
for sure
have become a huge thing for me. Like, that was the Sectioned record is something that's like I've been waiting for my whole life, and I just needed someone to show it to me.
Same, man. Yeah, as far as stuff that takes the technology developed in the more Dillinger or mathy side of hardcore and just welds it to converge and grind and shit, and makes these direct, uses those fancy rhythms and sort of genty guitar tones to make like just ripping hardcore songs. Yeah, what a cool band.
Yeah. Stuff that's actually heavy, and you can like crowd kill people in the pit too, even though it's really tech. And then something I would also compare it to, I don't know if you've ever really listened to them, Car Bomb.
No, all I'm thinking of is the Max Cavalera nail bomb.
No, so Car Bomb is a kind of techie hardcore band. They're pretty well known, but they're their tech isn't really mathcore. It's not about a lot of notes. It's more about like almost free time feeling stuff. Jazzy, but without the pretense. But then texturally, a lot of the stuff reminds me of stuff you would hear, and I there's no like actual term for it, so I call it school shooter core. Stuff like Admiral Angry, or another band that you showed me, Still Bloom, which is a sort of reinterpretation of almost like nu metal guitar textures.
Nu metal and Meshuggah.
Nu metal and Meshuggah into this like vicious kind of hardcore or sometimes down tempo style, like Admiral Angry.
It's mutant beatdown. Admiral Angry is pre-beatdown, but I could see that being an influence.
Admiral Angry is like proto down tempo, you know. So I thought that was really interesting because we've heard flickers of this on Serpent Column before, but I don't think it's ever been just like out and as clear and as straightforward as it is on this passage.
Dude, you can do the nu metal bassist dance to that.
Yeah, you really can. What I find really interesting is that
for our younger listeners, although maybe no. There's a certain kind of younger metal person who listens to nu metal unironically, but those aren't the people who listen to this show. So for the younger listeners, that involves sort of spinning around in a circle, kicking your legs out behind you rhythmically as you sort of like finger pick your bass aggressively.
I mean, shit,
sort of bobbing your head.
I still listen to nu metal unironically.
Moving on.
Anyway, but what I find intriguing is it's kind of hard to sample this record because you got to listen to it in a whole block. A lot of the sort of micro songs are clearly designed to adjoin each other and are parts of a sort of greater suite, as short as they are. But I do find it really impressive how when this section pops up, and it's a very distinct section of the whole record, it doesn't seem that surprising. Obviously, there's an angle to it. There is a shift in direction, but it doesn't sound impossible for the record, or like it's a gimmick or something. It feels very natural with the overall ebb and flow and narrative structure of the EP. And I found that really impressive. And I think that's something that has been done on previous Serpent Column stuff, but I never felt it as intuitively as I do here. Here, all of these tracks flow into each other in a way that's, at least to my ear, a lot more natural. Maybe I've just been too dumb for the previous ones, but it all works together for me.
I think here it speaks more to those ones are woven together by a sense of melody that, on a structural level is coming from like ambitious classical music and stuff, but like insofar as there's metal reference points, it's like linked melodic themes that are very black metal or very Black Death in various ways. They're sort of elaborate themes based on these related stem melodies, and they come and they go and they mutate and transform. There are certain rhythmic phrases that come up again and again, but there's that kind of like that's a kind of like I don't know, that's like a certain kind of melody oriented listening. And yeah, I think it's a black metal-y, like black metal at the highest level way of structuring songs. This is and often those linked melodic themes could be used to stitch together songs that were stylistically somewhat disparate. Like Mirror and Darkness has like at least two clear-cut kinds of songs, probably more than that. This one, in some ways, even though a lot of different kinds of shit happened throughout this, it's got a more stylistic continuity, and the continuities and echoes and interweavings are achieved more at the level of the body, right? That's just one thing. Like, this is way more body music.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, if there was an excess to certain parts of the older Serpent Column, it would occasionally be a little too intellectualized, right? Whereas this feeding off the energy from Endless Attainments that was also in Cathodos, this is just taking that, just using that initial, that eye for structure and just bringing that home on a physical level in a way that I think it makes death metal sense.
Yeah, I can see that. There's, I kind of wonder why Serpent Column never made its way into, like, really abstract, brutal death circles, in a way.
That is interesting.
I mean,
In the same way that Ulcerate has.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like guys who listen to Defeated Sanity would hear Serpent
Yes.
Column and be like, yeah, this is right in my wheelhouse. You know?
Yeah. I feel like Defeated Sanity would like Serpent Column. But, like, the guys in the band would like it.
They could trade notes with each other.
Yeah, claim to fame. One of them emailed us back once. It was a lovely guy. But so yeah, I don't know. That was cool. I also really liked the chiming, sort of like a very punkish punk art rock approach to kind of tremming. But I love that kind of bendy stuff.
Yeah, you love your skronky, like, very physical playing, and there's obviously tons of that across this record.
Yeah, for sure. And now for something completely different. Well, also very physical playing, and sort of passionate, and very direct in a way that some of the earlier sort of Serpent Column was not. This is the centerpiece of the record is a song towards the end called Edelweiss, right? Which is like, it's more than half the length of, or it's more than twice the length of any other thing on the record. Very clearly marked off as the centerpiece. This is Serpent Column at its most sort of lush, in a way that we've only heard in flickers, somewhat on, in a very different way on Invicta. This is reminiscent to some degree of some things in the, like, Apophenia on Mirror in Darkness, which just has this sort of very gorgeous, open melody, sort of soaring, lead-focused melody, sort of jumps out of that record. But so we're going to start with some more, sort of more, maybe sacramentum-y versions of a classic Serpent Column theme. One of these core stems that goes all the way back to Arnuthi Thalassa. We're gonna hear some storming Black Death, and then it's gonna go into someplace that maybe we could have seen coming, but is pretty different.
so how about those octaves, bro?
Well, black metal guy, am I allowed to describe this one as emo influenced?
Yeah, for real. I mean,
You always judge me when I do it, so.
but here, yes, no, I think here you're clear. I give this one to you. That is. Yeah, so just you get to the stomp part. We get this. I mean, in some ways, that's one of those very kind of outlaw rock things, right? It's a very American thing to do. You throw into the stomp part, and the stomp part's really melodic, but it like literally is an emo riff.
Actually,
like not like a screamo riff, like an emo riff.
Yeah, what it really reminds me of, actually, what a lot of the song reminds me of is something that you showed me, which was, what were they called? The Cruiser? Something like that?
The Cruiser? Oh, the Carrier. The Carrier.
Oh, the Carrier. Yep. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
The Cruiser. That's our ZZ Top cover band.
No, the Cruiser is the kind of like yacht rock Jimmy Buffett version of the Carrier. Yeah, but no, it reminded me a lot of the stuff that I heard off that Carrier compilation that you sent me one time, which I loved.
That's a great band. Yeah, no, and so there's something there. The dude from A Pregnant Light likes the Carrier a lot too.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah,
I didn't know
in that
anybody
kind of
knew about them.
wheelhouse.
That's very. It seems to me that's very obscure. So.
But the way that he's dancing down that scale, right? There's a very emo note choice, but the play and the chording could kind of be very black metal, that downstroke stuff. But also does that. Yeah, it's the Carrier. The Carrier plays on that first Carrier record, especially. The second one's a little more burly and maybe not as interesting, to be honest. But the first one, they're unclear if they listened to black metal. Probably not. They're just so good at those lush emo chords that they're playing them with the kind of bending chords into melodies technique that's just endemic to BM trem picking.
Well, I mean, does this also remind you in some sense of like that Swarm record that we covered
absolutely
a few weeks ago?
Yeah, and I mean, in several ways. I imagine you could name a few.
Oh, yeah. I mean, obviously just the juxtaposition between those very traditional kind of emo melodies and the much more aggressive modern hardcore skronk stuff, lashed together with the blast beats, this more extreme metal inflected drum performance. I mean, those are all constituent parts of Swarm throughout their career.
It's there's a funny way, there's like definitely a bit of a musical, not like ha-ha funny, but a bit of a musical joke here, where there's like this is the emo part, and then he keeps lacing in other sort of post-hardcore screamoisms, almost in this kind of like, see what I'm doing here? Kind of, it's very overtly embracing his influences. Like, as the riff goes on, he starts throwing in those sort of darker, kind of one-eyed God prophecy type, what's that, Buried Inside type, those dark octaves that sound kind of black metal. And we get towards, then it throws us back into a blasting part, but the blasting part starts working, even though the melodies are sinuous, like the classic Serpent column trem, they're working harmonically a lot closer to the screamo stuff, which, again, he's been doing for the last couple albums.
No, I mean, especially on Invicta. And I think that's one of the things that, I also like Invicta so much because that has a lot more outward emo stuff that I think flows very well with the rest of his music.
Yeah, and so, and then we're left on this sort of stomp part, which, again, really back in that sort of heavy, dark, textured, emotional hardcore thing. And it recalls some other cool breakdowny part on an earlier Serpent column record that I just tried to find on Cathodos, but I think is actually, or sorry, it's Cathodos, isn't it? Jesus, I'm remembering the interview. It recalls some other part that I think is actually on Mirror and Darkness, but because the last couple of years have just been like a time warp, it all kind of runs together.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. So this song, right, just emotionally, really different. Again, Apophenia would be the comparison for this in terms of just sort of, it's got kind of an exuberant vibe to it. Exuberant's the wrong word, but it's very, there's a nakedness to it that's uncommon in this music.
Mm-hmm. I can see that.
Yeah, there's this is almost like this is almost the Serpent Column love song.
Yeah, I could see that.
And, and then the EP closes out with some more of that gesture. Again, the last song is called, like, Vesper, so like an evening song. And it's got some more intense stuff, but it ends on a sort of more melancholy, more driving version of that kind of core emo stomp riff. Then just sort of swoops up in this kind of major key coda, turns around like we're going to resolve in some strange, suspended, optimistic place, sinks down to a root, and then just up a fifth, just heroic interval, done.
Hey, it's Kari from Sepulchre Curse.
And I'm Ygra.
You're listening to Terminus.
All right, we're back with our final record of the night. And, just to open things up, Black Metal Guy, have you ever heard a Nunslaughter record?
Before this?
Yeah.
No.
And how long have you known about Nunslaughter?
2008.
And therein lies the problem. Nunslaughter is a band that basically everybody in extreme metal knows, but you're not an outlier. Most people have never actually sat down and listened to a Nunslaughter record. And part of why I wanted to bring this record on the show was to maybe, for at least a few people, resolve that. Because after listening to this, is there any reason people shouldn't be listening to them?
Well, the thing they're a band that got a reputation, and the reputation, right, comes in part from reality, but is, like, obstructs people listening to it. I don't think, like, Nunslaughter in some ways has a good reputation. They're known for being, like, diehard, true death metal.
Yeah.
They're very persistent underground band. And they're just seen as, like, chill dudes who, like, do a split with tons of people, right? The idea is, like, Nunslaughter's always doing splits, always doing EPs, never puts out a full length. And it's like, I think for me in the past, it's just like, great, if I want to get into this band, do I have to, like, comb through, like, 20 fucking EPs? Like,
yeah.
To, like, and I get it, there are some are supposed to be better than others and more definitive, but it was just, they were seen, that was a barrier to entry in itself. I think if you're more of a grind guy, it makes more sense to do something like that, right? It's like, oh yeah, I'll just get one of the EPs and see if it's good. Get a split, see if it's good. But not having full lengths to go to, as silly as it sounds, is probably a factor. Also, they have this reputation as being sort of, like, deliberately goofy, right? And when you hear about Nunslaughter because they're so established, is when you're first getting into extreme metal, when something goofy is the last thing you're looking for, right? At least if you're me. So, like, it just wasn't high on my... I always thought, like, I always had a favorable bias toward them. Like, yeah, Nunslaughter, cool. Like, cool band, right? But, like, I never listened to them. It struck me as there's a certain kind of person who does listen to Nunslaughter, and those are the people who are very in the specific cultural niche around Hell's Headbangers.
Yeah. I mean, Hell's Headbangers has been Nunslaughter's, house label for basically as long as Hell's Headbangers has existed.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I should say, we're covering the newest Nunslaughter, Red is the Color of Ripping Death, out on Hell's Headbangers.
Also Ohio, right?
Also Ohio, an exurb, basically, of Cleveland, where Nunslaughter are from. It wouldn't... I actually went through, Nunslaughter's archives in terms of releases, and some of the earliest releases from House Headbangers were Nunslaughter albums. Nunslaughter albums, splits, EPs, what have you. And yeah, I understand the idea that, they've got this enormous discography of all these 7 inches, all these little, live EPs, that kind of thing. But the reality is, as a guy that had a lot of those 7 inches in the past and has listened to a lot of Nunslaughter, it doesn't really matter where you start. Because Nunslaughter has always been the same band. They've always stuck with the principles that they started with back in... honestly, they stretch back to 1985 under a different name. So this is possibly one of the longest continuously running death metal bands that's ever existed. And yet, it's vanishingly rare that you ever encounter someone who has actually listened to Nunslaughter in a serious way. So, since this is your first experience, I'll get into some of the nuances, and the differences between this and previous records, but what was your impression, really sitting down, listening to a full record for the first time from these guys?
I liked it. I wouldn't, it did not strike me as the most memorable in the world. However, it was just good. It's a category of record that we rarely have on the show, because it's usually bigger bands or different bands after different kinds of effects than what we're after on the show. But it had that feeling of just yeah, this is a solid record. I'd listen to this again. This is fun. You put it on and it's extremely listenable. It has the guitar tone is great immediately. Important qualification for a death metal record. Very, very solid organic tone without being super burly. The riffs are not, they're death metal riffs, right? They're not trying to write fancy individual... They're not trying to write individually memorable riffs, but the riffs all hit well, right? They're all well-constructed riffs, and the playing is really tight. The energy is really high, and each track is just undeniably a ripper.
Yeah.
Which you wrote in the notes, but, it's
obvious.
And I guess it's in the fucking title, isn't it? The subliminal messaging.
It is ripping death.
It does indeed rip. And it's a thing that struck me was that it sounds a lot less like what doesn't really sound like a lot of the classic sort of Black Death thrashing stuff on Hell's Headbangers, nor does it sound very much like what you would normally expect of American death metal in the early 90s.
Yeah,
but
it's
it does sound a lot.
Personality.
I've got a couple ideas of the reference points, but in some ways it sounds more like European stuff, which interested me.
Yeah, and I think that comes out a little bit more on this record in particular. So just for context, for those who aren't super familiar with the band, so like I said, Nunslaughter is a band with an incredible back catalog, going all the way back to 1985, when they were known as Death Sentence, before they changed the name to Nunslaughter in 87. And I believe it was...
Cranking it up.
Yeah, cranking it up. So up to a certain point, Nunslaughter was just milling around the Cleveland underground. They were putting out a tape or, maybe a 7-inch every couple years. But then 1995 is when Jim Sadis joined and became their drummer for the next 20 years until, unfortunately he passed away in 2015. And in 2015, there was a period of questioning for the band. Jim Sadis was one of the core members of the band. He became a huge part of their sound, really bringing in and establishing a lot of the distinct punk influence that really exists to this day. He was honestly, Jim Sadist, when he passed away, Cleveland mourned him because he was such an integral part of the music scene there, not just for metal, but for punk and rock. He had played in so many bands, and, he had been a big part of it. A true underground legend. And, I was fortunate enough to get to see him playing with Nunslaughter probably about a year before he passed away. I met him briefly. He was a wonderful guy. So, that was a real tragedy.
Yeah.
But, importantly, this is the band's first full-length album since Jim Sadist's death. And you got to imagine, for a band with that kind of track record, with 20 years with the same drummer, there apparently was debate in Nunslaughter whether they were going to continue. But in the following year, in 2016, they decided to keep going. They picked up a new drummer, another local guy with a long history in Cleveland death metal and punk bands, and they continued. So what we're hearing here is, 6 years past Jim's death, sort of the revival of the band. I mean, obviously they've been doing plenty of splits and plenty of those 7 inches, but really we were waiting for the definitive statement that Nunslaughter is going to continue. It sounds weird, but I actually feel things when I talk about Nunslaughter, just because they're a band that's been around for so long, relatively unappreciated by a lot of people, and, there's no reason that should be the case, because after listening to this record, everybody in extreme metal should be listening to these guys. Imagine, since 85, so many years into their career, yeah, we should all be listening to them. So let's talk about that. So should we go with my sample first or yours?
Either. I got something chronological we could do in terms of like the longevity. So why don't we go with mine first?
Okay, sure.
This is from the second track. With a the whole record is very frank, and
third track. This one.
Third track. Sorry, I can't count. This is it doesn't. The YouTube doesn't have the tracks under it, and I can't count. Look, black metal's about passion. You guys, you count your rhythms and your things. I just we
just believe in it, man.
Exactly. Yeah, we just yell. So this is To a Whore. It's the third track, and that's what I was gonna say. It's very frank. It's called To a Whore. Okay, let's go.
Fire, wicked blaze, once leaving it down. She started to stray. I thought that was me, and only my brick. That was a lie. She fucked all the dead. Coming out door. I'm on a soul door. Yeah, it's nothing but a fuck. And I keep coming back for more.
Oh man, on the YouTube upload from Hell's Headbangers, it's got all the lyrics to the songs, which will actually be important for us to talk about, but they're very funny on this one.
Dude, yeah. I mean, so we don't need to read it all, but basically, the last part is worth reading. So So I was enticed by her wicked ways. Once we bedded down, she started to stray. I thought there was me and only my prick. That was a lie. She fucked all the dicks. All my love to a whore, my mortal soul to a whore. I was nothing but a fuck, but I kept coming back for more. I tell you now this tale of woe, not about a lady, but one fucking hoe. Which is all... I mean, given these guys are like 20 years too old for that word, right? So
Yes.
keeping up. Believe you me, she was not a witch. When she sucked my cock, she was one bad bitch. I gave my heart to a whore. I made love to a whore. The interesting thing is he goes back to the chorus at the end. So basically, these lyrics are very, very capital deliberately in the way we use on the show. Capital D, dumb, right?
Yeah.
This is extremely dumb on purpose, right? But there's something smart that happens in the song. He turns it around in a clever way at the end. It turns out it's stupid smart. First of all, you just get really funny shit, like, believe you me, she was not a witch. When she sucked my cock, she was one bad bitch. And that seems to shift the mood of the song a little bit. So originally it's strongly butthurt, right? In a way that's understandable, right? Makes sense to be pissed, right? But in a way that also sort of like makes it out like, the woman gave him sort of false impressions and whatever, and to some degree sort of sounds like she did, right? But he starts, the sense of grievance sort of, or the sense of having like lost out, right? With in that sort of thing, like, it turns out she was fucking everyone. There's a kind of, I lost out in this, right? Damn, I got suckered, right? Makes sense. You feel dumb, right? Then he flips it around. So he just starts talking about how good the sex was, and talking about how presumably she's some gothy chick, but she wasn't a witch. She was just, and then at the end, he's like, he goes back to the chorus. He says, she was nothing but a fuck, and I kept coming back for more.
Yeah.
And so there's a mode of like, he's coming to, it's like, okay, you get over-invested in something, you get butthurt, and then he's like laughing about it with his buddies in the bar and
then at the very end, she treated me like shit, but I kept coming back for more.
Well, yeah. No. At the end of that's what it says on the lyric sheet. But at the end of the song, he actually says she was nothing but a fuck, but I kept coming back for more.
Okay. I got
and so the funny thing is, it puts him in it. It's like, okay, he's just like, hey, had a good time, haha, laugh it off with the bros, right? At the same time, it's sort of less butthurt at the woman, too. So it sort of flips it around in this kind of like, well, okay, she's gonna act the way she's gonna act. Right, it starts out seeming like it's inhabiting a very adolescent space, and then ends up not without the bitterness or anger, of course, but it ends up in a mature and worldly space, which is funny and cool. You're like, oh, this is a cool guy.
Yeah, no, and that's part of Nunslaughter's thing, is because obviously you can tell through the rest of the records, like, there's extremely smart lyrics on this record as well. So you know that it's a goofy, sort of internal joke of a song from the beginning. But yeah, that's part of it. And that kind of leads to something that I wanted to talk to you about specifically, which is Nunslaughter has always been very interesting because they've been, in a sense, for a lot of years, maybe less so on this record, a sort of punk band in death metal drag,
Yeah, so let's talk about that now, apropos of the influence on this track. So this track thrashes, but in the way that only late 80s, 9 to 91 death metal can. Sort of, it's, that is a specifically death metal way of thrashing. As far as, this is patterned off of Deathstrike songs, except Nunslaughter was active at the same time, and in the Midwest at the same time. These guys probably played shows with Deathstrike and Master.
Yeah, I can definitely see that.
It's just coming completely from that universe of proto-death metal that is more extreme than a lot of the other proto-death metal because it's coming mostly from Discharge.
So it's like discharge composed exclusively with tritones and like half steps.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I guess I was curious about, like, so there's this huge punk influence. It's very funny because on the, on Bandcamp, I don't know if it was Nunslaughter or Hell's Headbangers, they're like, oh, the hardcore punk influence is completely gone now.
What the
fuck are you talking about? Dude,
Yeah,
this is... Nunslaughter has always been 25 to 50% a punk band at heart, you know?
I mean, yeah, that's very punk.
Yeah, and honestly, I would compare them to, I don't know how familiar you are, but with another band that's kind of like punk in metal drag, like Driller Killer, something like that.
They're a band that that's a D-beat band that metalheads know about, but I've never really checked out.
No, they're pretty cool. They just sound like heavy, ugly Motorhead. You know,
there's a band like that that's a Marduk side project called Moment Maniacs that this does sound like. Moment Maniacs sort of bounces in a similar way and also has really nasty lyrics. I think I've mentioned them on the show before. It's almost like the dudes from Marduk were like, let's do a D-beat band with lyrics that would really piss off the editors of Maximum Rock and Roll.
That's always been one of the charming things is, like, Nunslaughter is in a lot of ways like it's the house punk band for death metal guys. Now, obviously, they've always been a death metal band in a sense, but the punk influence is so overwhelming, you can't discount it. And I just thought that part of the promo sheet was hilarious. The idea, the hardcore punk influence is gone. We're going to talk more about that on following samples. It is absolutely not. In fact, this is possibly more punk and hardcore than the band has ever been, just in a different way. But, before we get into that, I want to get to one of the more pure death metal songs. This is called Annihilate the Kingdom of God. And it's a pretty short one, so we'll listen to the whole track. And this is where we'll start talking about the lyrics and the energy behind this music. Because, at least in terms of my reading, lyrics and music combined, this is one of the best directly just like satanic and anti-Christian death metal songs I've heard in decades. This is at the top of the pile. So let's listen to this guy right here.
My mind and body will meet, and craving love will rain down on you. For what you need cannot be found in the sky. Heaven abound is only for the wretched chosen few. La Pasate, denied the written word. My evidence, we are forever scorned. Objection, the prophetic Lord. Not Christians will rest forevermore. Blasphemy, heresy, will never find peace. Your prophecy denied the virgin born. My evidence, we are forever scarred. Obsession, the prophets of life. The Christians will wish you never born.
Well, that was very angry.
Yeah, that's a really, really savage song. One of my favorites on the record, as well as the one after that, Beware of God. That was great. And you asked a question in the notes while that was playing. You know, it's like, I don't want to just keep describing it compared to other stuff. So, I mean, what's the best way to do that? Let's listen to a short track from earlier in Nunslaughter's career. This is a song just called God.
All right.
Yeah, it's a minute long, and this is old school Nunslaughter. Yeah, so that's Nunslaughter. So you can tell that it's similar to what's going on now, but a little bit different.
Much shorter song, much sort of more like a stereotype of what an 80s hardcore song would sound like. So I can kind of see what the promo means, right? It's like, okay, driven by 1-2 beats, very fast, more like an American hardcore song from the 80s.
Yeah.
Right, fast, borderline grindy, as this just kind of more like, as you would say, more kind of a gestural kind of riff. Almost like the sort of, what's it called? The fucking, that one band, Mortician, that you like.
Yeah.
Got a kind of smeary Mortician chromatic riff. Okay, so I get that. Very similar thematics, in a way. But, yeah, very different. Because this reminds, I mean, you said it in the notes, but weirdly, I wasn't looking at the notes and I heard it. This sounds like Morbid Angel. So
Yeah,
there
really
is some
early
change.
Angel.
So there is some change from the classic Nunslaughter sound, and I get how this is more capital M metal than that.
It's more
But at the
capital...
same time, it's still just moved. It just has a different punk rhythm. It's just more DB driven.
Yeah, and I think, much like Christ our Savior, Nunslaughter, in the way that Christ is both completely mortal and completely godly, Nunslaughter is both completely punk and completely death metal at the same time. I think that's honestly the best way to describe it. Because the way I interpret, like, for instance, this song in particular, Annihilate the Kingdom of God and God itself, the thing that makes them distinct is that they are playing death metal that is reaching both back to 80s punk, like the very early stuff that would, say, influence Slayer, as well as, like, NWO BHM by way of Morbid Angel. Like, way back on, like, Abominations of Desolation, their 80s record that was only released much later. It's very interesting. You know, there's a lot of bands right now that are reaching back to primordial ideas of extreme metal, but a lot of them are not accessing traditional metal and old school punk in the same way. And I think that's one of the things that makes Nunslaughter distinct. You know, they were guys that were really around for it, who were playing music while that was contemporary, and they've never forgotten that distinct quality.
Yeah,
I mean, so in terms of, so where do we want to go from there? Do we want to go to more sort of more punky stuff, or more? Yeah, why don't you do your other punky stuff, and then we'll finish on mine.
Well, I think that's the distinction, is because so maybe some of the most absolutely punky stuff has gone away, but I think it's just been replaced.
I see what you
with,
mean. Yes,
Yeah.
punky has been replaced with hardcore. Yes, both in the
Yes.
discharge sense and in the other sense that you're about to get to.
Oh yeah. So
Which-
let's listen to "The Devil Will Not Stray," which is easily one of my favorite tracks on the record. And you will know this better than me. You brought on some great references just because I don't know where some of those early hardcore bands are from. But you picked up on it immediately, this Cleveland sound, the idea of these influential bands from the same scene. So let's listen to this, and let's listen to what I was calling in the notes satanic integrity.
Integrity is sort of satanic. That's the thing.
There we go. Let's do it.
Yeah, so when we first heard that, or when I first listened to this record, I almost thought I was sort of like, hearing it via capital H hardcore, because that's my measuring stick for big chug parts like that. But listening back to it, dude, it's like, yeah, it's not just the dischargey stuff from the 80s. It's like, that's for sure Cleveland hardcore.
Yeah, and I wasn't aware of the Cleveland connection because I don't really pay attention to where hardcore bands are from, just because I'm not from that scene.
Yeah.
But you were comparing it to, I mean, I said satanic integrity just because you're the guy that introduced me to integrity, but you also compared it to Ringworm, who are from, like, the same scene and the same, like, time period.
Yeah, no, I mean, Ringworm are just another band that had the sort of the early version of the Holy Terror sound. They're from Cleveland at the same time, similar vocal style, and basically same idea, which is Slayer and really early death metal as reference points for hardcore, just the first real metalcore bands, right, metallic hardcore bands. And both of them, Ringworm, so Integrity would technically say they're not Satanists, but only technically, because in fact they follow the Process Church of the Final Judgment.
Okay.
And worship a variety, I think, sort of like a quaternary deity. There's like Yahweh, there's Jehovah, there's Christ, there's Satan, and there's somebody else. I can't remember. And they also worship Abraxas, the Gnostic demon. But yeah, when you started with that stuff, like at the beginning, you could just yell like Misha, which is the beginning to like, their first record. You could just yell it over that. So like you can definitely hear that. You could hear the Ringworm. There are a few other bands in that vein. Like this would be later '90s or like early 2000s, but like All Out War, sort of Slayer core, people called it. I went back to listen to some All Out War recently because I've referenced them on the show before, but I never really listened to them. Fucking sick. Really aged really well.
Oh yeah, you showed me some of that a while back, and I really enjoyed it. But real quick, the lyrics on this record, specifically, you brought up, before I even listened to it, the lyrics to a song called "Dead in 10,"
yes,
which I think that might be a kind of skeleton key to the whole record. The serious parts of it, at least. There's a couple like goofy songs that are, just having fun, because some of these songs were written around when Jim Sadis was still around. So I have my read on this, but what did you think about it? Why did this stand out to you?
Well, it was so frank. I mean, again, we're talking about nakedness with Serpent Column, but like this is on another level in terms of this. So what is Dead in 10, right? The classic death metal lyric. And this one rolls along. Another influence I hear a lot on this record, or adjacency, because I think it's coming from similar 80s proto-death territory, is Grave, Into the Grave, which is one of my favorite death metal records. I don't think they're Grave influenced. I think they're just drawing on the same shit as Grave was. In terms of Grave doing something much more like, much more caveman than their Swedish counterparts, right? But this song like rolls along on those kind of like bulldozer bouncing sort of like early Grave or Master or Deathstrike rhythms. And it's, usually the chorus would be "You'll be dead in 10," right? And usually we mean like 10 minutes or 10 seconds, right? Yeah. The chorus here is "I'll be dead in 10." And I was like, did I hear that right? And so that's what drew me to the lyrics. Should we read them? Because it's so short.
Yeah, sure. I'll do it. Now has come the time to reflect on life well spent. Music, people, travels, and what it all has meant. Dead in 10. Fulfilled beyond compare in a truly sordid past. I have come to terms that life will not last. Dead in 10. Dead in 10. I'll be dead in 10. When the final time has come to rest my weary head, no funeral procession or viewing that I am dead, I wish to be burned and all the ashes put to sod, knowing while alive I cursed and denied your God. I'll be dead in 10, I'll be dead in 10. This is not a prophecy or a vision in a dream. It is just the way of life. Some things are what they seem. Dead in 10. To live a life of wonder and accept the end is near is not nihilistic. Death is nothing to fear. Dead in 10. Dead in 10. I'll be dead in 10. So what is your perspective? I mean, I have my read, but you go ahead.
Obviously it must be, it's influenced by the wake of Jim Sadis' death, I'd imagine, right? But
that's a big component. Is I think it is absolutely a tribute to him and like a rest in power kind of thing.
And also, I think very much like someone reflecting. So this is probably by Dawn of the Dead, right? Who's the other longtime member. He's been there since '87. He's 51. And so if you read these very literally, this is just a dude saying, look, one of my best buds didn't make it even as far as me. If I keep living at the rate I am and keep, fucking bad bitches and, steamrolling along, good chance I'll be dead in 10 years. I certainly can't expect any more than that. And this is really the first of the... These guys are so early to it. These are the first in on extreme metal. And before then, all we've got is sort of like R.I.P. Quorthon, tragic untimely deaths like Quorthon, or, cataclysmically inevitable deaths like Euronymous are dead, right? Where, like, these are first-generation dudes who are nowhere near the end of the line for a normal person, right? But for somebody who's been, like, doing coke and drinking constantly
for people like us,
yeah. For somebody who's been partying for 45 years and living life on the road on couches and in small apartments, and maybe if he's lucky, like a decent, nice little bungalow now. This is just looking at it hard in the face. And from the kind of atheist, satanic as metaphor for robust atheism thing, that was always at the core of the most, like, the death metal that wasn't Morbid Angel. I don't know, and it's just cool. On the show we talk about, death metal sometimes relapses into humanism and whatnot. Well, maybe this is a kind of humanistic record, but, like, in a way that's pretty hard to, nobody can look at these lyrics and say, be too occult or too neo-religious for them.
Yeah. No, it's a confrontation of reality in the way that I think a lot of the best death metal was, really going back to the roots, the embracing of it, Jim passed away, unfortunately, before his time, but Don accepts it, It's both a tribute to his friend, I assume one of his best friends in the world, and an acceptance of what this life means. We're going to go all out, live life to its fullest, and it has natural consequences, and fuck it, if I'm dead in 10, that's okay.
But that's not the way for me. Oh no, on a day like no other, I welcome death. I welcome the reaper's icy embrace. His cold damp cloak as it scrapes against my skin. On a day like no other, because this day will come but once in your entire life. It should be a truly magnificent event, something to remember for all eternity. On a day like no other, you want people to gather and people to lament the severity of your final moments on this earth. But this is more than significant, this event. This is forever. On a day like no other, when I die, I wanna die violently. 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 What could be more mundane than dying of old age, or of natural causes when there's death by misadventure, to be pursued?